Hello everyone, geologist, geophysicist Stefan Burns here with breaking news. An earthquake swarm right now is battering Granada, Spain. There's been quite a bit of damage to buildings there. We've had 4 big earthquakes and more than 500 earthquakes in total with this swarm. Now, this location on the globe, the Granada Basin, does get these sort of earthquake swarms, but it also gets very big earthquakes. There was a magnitude 7.8 earthquake which struck here in 1954. I can show you the epicenter of that. That was a deep focus earthquake, 626 kilometers down. And the reason why you had such a big, deep earthquake in that location was because you have this Gibraltar subduction arc here. So you have the Atlantic Ocean subducting underneath the Strait of Gibraltar. So we'll talk about those dynamics. No coincidence that you have the Granada Basin right in that area, and also you have a huge gravity anomaly right in that area, and also that this is the most active place seismically for the entire Iberian Peninsula. But this seismic swarm is the biggest, the strongest that has struck in decades. I think it's actually perhaps the strongest earthquake swarm that has happened since the 1884 Andalusia earthquake, which was a magnitude 6.6 to magnitude 7. It reached a peak intensity of 10, so there was extreme shaking that was felt. When you have these geologic basins with sedimentary fill, you can get a lot of seismic resonance amplification, shaking, destruction. There were villages with the Andalusia earthquake of 1884 that just completely got leveled. So 90%, think 90% of buildings gone, and then the remaining 10% are basically uninhabitable because they're at 4 out of 5 in terms of damage. So this is a very serious situation, and I have been seeing some downplaying of this just in general out there online. I don't know why. And there's also some really interesting synchronicities with this. So there's a lot to cover in today's video. We're going to start with just the basic like geologic setting, the straight facts as it relates to these earthquakes. Then we'll expand into some of the historical earthquakes, the overall faulting of the area, and kind of what we may be able to expect. This is not a guarantee that a higher magnitude earthquake is coming. Let me state that right from the beginning. But when it comes to examining earthquake swarms, sometimes they happen and that's all they are. It's just a swarm. Other times they are foreshock swarms for something bigger. And so just inherently, by having a earthquake swarm occurring, there is an increased risk of a bigger event happening. That's just simply what it is. And to think otherwise is foolish, because we see many times in the record for earthquakes that swarms precede high magnitude events. So it's certainly just an increased risk. So this is very serious. We're going to go over everything. And maybe this will help us get a sense of what is happening. But regardless, this has already been a historic event with this earthquake swarm. We see the 4 main events here via the USGS. So this is a 5.2 according to them. And then we see that we had a triple burst today, all in the span of about 2 hours. And that is quite notable. So here we see the 4.9, 4.6, 4.7. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the IGN, which is the Institute of Geography, the National Institute of Geography for Spain, their earthquake institution, you could say, their seismic group, they have these earthquakes at lesser magnitudes. So 4.7, they have a 4.8 for the first earthquake there on the 14th of August, then a 4.8, 4.2, and 4.0 for today. So that's pretty big discrepancy in the numbers. And just based off of those 4 earthquakes, calculating the cumulative magnitude, the USGS cumulative magnitude is a 5.35, and the IGN cumulative magnitude is a 5.03. meaning that the cumulative magnitude as calculated by the USGS is 3 times stronger in energy release than it is calculated by the IGN. So somewhere in between those numbers, the truth exists. I don't know what it is. And from now on, actually, when I'm reporting on earthquakes, I'm going to report on the range for the magnitude because, for example, when it comes to earthquakes in Japan, the Japanese authorities are always publishing numbers higher than USGS, whereas here with the IGN, they're publishing them lower than USGS. So it's difficult to kind of ascertain what numbers to use, the truth, etc. But in general, doesn't matter which source, a cumulative magnitude 5 earthquake has struck just in the past few days. And this is all 2 days after a total solar eclipse passed over Spain and just Spain for the Iberian Peninsula. So we see the path of this eclipse starting in the North Arctic there for Russia, sweeping through eastern Greenland. It was peak eclipse over Iceland, but notice how it did not touch Portugal or France at all. And it perfectly ended for the Balearic Islands right there. So this is really quite interesting. And of course, we've had this global seismic burst, which has been occurring right now, starting on the 10th of August with the 7.4 which struck Colombia. And then most recently on the 14th of August, we had the 7.7 which struck Indonesia. We had some other magnitude 6 earthquakes, a 6.9 on the 15th. Of course, that magnitude 5.2 USGS, 4.8 IGN, that struck Spain on the 14th of August. And a total solar eclipse is a perfect new moon alignment. So on 2 days of either side of this total solar eclipse, which passed over Spain, we've had this global seismic burst, and we started to get an earthquake swarm, the most notable in decades, 2 days afterwards. In addition to that, Spain is a site of 3 eclipse crossings in the next 18 months, which is phenomenal. The chance of that is, I mean, it's astronomical. It's like at least like 1 in a million. I think it's probably more like 1 in 10 million or 100 million or something. Like, it's really quite remarkable to have 3 eclipses passing over Spain in 18 months. This was the first one. The second one, and this is very notable for another reason as well, is that this is going to be the longest total solar eclipse of the 21st century. This is occurring on the 2nd of August, 2027. And look at the location of Granada as it relates to this eclipse. It is right there. Granada did not see the total solar eclipse that passed on the 12th of August because it sliced through like this. So they had a deep, deep partial eclipse. And they're also not going to get the total solar eclipse from there either. But they are kind of equidistant. And then the other one actually sweeps up like this. So equidistantly, this is actually the most central location for these eclipses, which is interesting. And so we're going to talk about that more. But let us get back to what is happening here with these earthquakes, because there's been quite a bit of damage, actually, to these buildings as a result. Big cracks in the wall. We can pull up some videos on X a little bit later. But the real risk is if we do get a bigger earthquake, these buildings have already been damaged. So they're going to not really have an ability to withstand, let's say, a magnitude, even a magnitude 6 would be really bad news. If a magnitude 6 struck, that would be very bad news. And it is possible there are multiple faults in the Granada Basin that have the potential to do up to magnitude 7. So this morning, downloaded some research papers, read through them, highlighted them up, the whole deal. And well, that is basically the latest data. These are all fairly recent papers of the past decade or so. So there's tons of faults in the Granada Basin here. And the longer a fault is, the higher the rupture can be. And so there's faults that are 20, 30, 40 kilometers in length. And so they can have these ruptures that go up to magnitude 6, 6.5, even magnitude 7. The Andalusia earthquake, 1884, it had a hypocenter about, 8 kilometers down. and its estimated magnitude is 6.6 to 7. That was back in 1884. So it's a little difficult to estimate. There was no surface rupture with that earthquake, just cracks and damage and landslides, rock falls, things of that nature. So there was no clear surface rupture from that earthquake. And we have really good data on that earthquake, though it's not modern seismic data with a seismograph, etc., because there were 3 different commissions that were initiated after that earthquake by, I think it's Italy, Spain, and France to ascertain what happened. So there's really good information as to the intensity of the shaking across the Granada Basin, which helped researchers to pretty closely identify the likely fault that was responsible, and also the depth and some of these features. It was on a pretty steeply dipping normal fault, and that's what we see with this earthquake that occurred on the 14th, but USGS as a 5.2, again IGN as a 4.8. That was an extensional earthquake. So you had the blocks move down like this. So it's this extension, okay? Now, why are we getting that extension? Let's check out the subduction zone that we have here, all right? So here's Spain, here's Morocco, there's the Strait of Gibraltar. This is the Atlantic Ocean, all right? And what we're seeing is the oceanic crust starts to subduct down. Here is that subduction arc outlined there. It subducts down and basically goes vertical. And we have data for this at least going to 600 kilometers because we've had those 2 deep focus earthquakes that struck. 1954, magnitude 7.8. That's huge. But because it was so deep, it wasn't like super destructive, thankfully. Also a magnitude 6.3, also greater than 600 kilometers down in 2010. So it's not just a one-off. We know that there's some ripping apart of this oceanic slab, this lithosphere that's subducting down. And Granada, you know, is like roughly in this region. And if we look at the gravity map, here we have our gravity anomalies. So we have huge gravity anomalies right here with the Granada Basin. Now, just off to the east of the Granada Basin, you have the Sierra Nevada mountain range. But basically what this gravity anomaly is telling you is that there is more gravity and that things, let's say you were to drop, you were just to drop a metal sphere here, and you could ultra precisely calculate its speed. It would drop faster here than it would over there because that oceanic slab that's subducting from the Atlantic is cold, it's heavy, it's dense, and it is denser than the mantle, so the gravity is higher. So that metal sphere would fall ever so slightly faster. We can measure that with high precision gravitometers and now the satellite measurements of this and more. So what are the chances that this gravity anomaly and the subduction are directly where the Granada Basin is? Well, if you have this flow, right, this pooling of the slab down, you're going to have more gravity, and that's probably what's generating this basin, this extensional basin in the first place, because these are millions of years old structures that are evolving over geologic time. So I find it funny that there were people that were asking some AI on Twitter, like you're asking Grok basically, saying like, is there a connection between the 7.8 and the earthquake storm that's happening now? It's like, no, there's zero connection. It's like, what? Are you serious? Like, look at the epicenters first and foremost. There's the 7.8, there's the 5.2. They are smack dab in the same location as it relates to their surface expression, their epicenter. But keep in mind, that's where the subduction is happening. That's where you have that gravity anomaly. Like, yeah, of course they're linked together. Like, come on. So the fact that we've had big earthquakes here, again, that's in that oceanic slab, but the fact that we've had big earthquakes here before, and also big earthquakes that are closer to the surface, the Andalusia earthquake, 1884, up to magnitude 7 perhaps, means that this is a very serious situation. Now, we did have an earthquake swarm that occurred back in 2020 to 2021, and this is very interesting, all right? So this is where things start to get interesting. We see that there were like 5,000 plus events from this. Here we're only seeing, oh yeah, so we're like 5,000 plus events, all right? And there was a clustering of magnitude 4s that occurred in January. 5 magnitude 4 plus earthquakes struck. And then there was a single magnitude 4.5 that hit in August of 2021. So this swarm started up, if you recall, back in December of 2020, is actually when we had the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, and that's in fact the closest conjunction of the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in hundreds of years, with how close they got to each other as viewed from Earth geocentrically. We had that on winter solstice, December 21st of 2020, which is just interesting correspondence with this. But then we had this activity here in January. We see how it died off. Look at how it died off, all right? And then just happens that on August 12th, we had the strongest earthquake of the swarm, and that was a magnitude 4.5. Well, what was August 12th again? August 12th, as you recall, was the total solar eclipse, which just occurred. And that's 2 days before August 14th, which is when the new earthquake swarm has started. So the different events are connected together synchronistically, which is really interesting. August 12th is also the day that we had the last megaquake before the magnitude 8.8, which struck in 2025. So if you look here, megaquakes, August 12th, 2021, 8.1 South Sandwich Islands. You notice there's a megaquake about 2 weeks before that on July 29th, magnitude 8.2 in Alaska, also 2021. And then look at how the last megaquake to occur, magnitude 8.8, Kamchatka, that was also on July 29th. That's also an important date. I'll show you why later. But they actually, in the research paper, discussed how it was a little difficult to fully detail the magnitude 4.5 which struck on August 12th because there were these teleseismic waves coming in from the magnitude 8.1 South Sandwich Islands. So basically, the way I see that earthquake right there is like hitting a bell saying, pay attention to August 12th. This is important. Pay attention to August 12th because, well, again, we had that total solar eclipse on August 12th. The next one is August 2nd. The next eclipse that we will have is August 2nd. I can show you that right here. We can go to our eclipse map and we see how it stretches across basically Europe and Africa, part of the Middle East too. It's really interesting, in fact, because it starts right at the mid-ocean ridge for the Atlantic, right where the plates start to spread apart. Then it cuts directly through the Gibraltar subduction zone, where it then subducts underneath. And there's people talking about how this is going to be like a ring of fire in 20 million years because of that, right? If you extrapolate out the geology right now. Then it follows the boundary between the African and European plates. African plate subducting underneath the European plate slowly, but it is. It follows that boundary, then cuts down through the rift that we have here, continues on, and basically terminates where you get the spreading centers in the Indian Ocean in this very unusual mid-ocean ridge, which no one really has a good explanation for. So this total solar eclipse coming up on August 2nd of 2027, it's the longest total solar eclipse of the century. It's going to be the longest one till like 2117 or something like that. But it's also specifically following these plate boundaries like perfectly, which, I mean, coincidence, I don't know. I mean, it's just very interesting. I think it's worthy of pointing out. So we're having this earthquake swarm right now strike just to the north of that, just a few days after we had the prior eclipse pass directly through Spain. And we have a third one coming up in 2028 in January, and that's going to be an annular eclipse that sweeps up like this. So there's some odd things happening. Now, in addition to this, we are right now in a coronal hole high-speed stream impact. So here we have our real-time solar wind, and we've had 2 3-hour periods of G1 geomagnetic storming, which we can see here. So we see our solar wind velocity now is at 551 kilometers per second, and we've had these increases in the solar wind magnetic field. The density is starting to drop. The reason why I mention this is because specifically these coronal hole high-speed streams are well correlated with high magnitude earthquake activity. So this is potentially going to drive more high magnitude earthquake activity as part of this global seismic burst that we're experiencing right now. It's active. We're just now in it, and we're going to be in that high-speed stream for another few days. We're right now in this high-speed stream impact, and we could be seeing high magnitude earthquake activity globally as a result for the next few days as a continuation of this global seismic burst. And perhaps Spain is the next location to get hit. This swarm is not helping the situation. It's not a guarantee that we're going to get a bigger earthquake or earthquakes than we've already had, but it's certainly possible. It is certainly possible. So some interesting things to point out beyond this. All right, let's go back to Google Earth, and I want to show you the connection between the 1954 earthquakes and the Granada Basin, because again, you know, if you ask AI or a lot of geologists to the area, you know, just a lot of people that haven't studied into this really qualitatively, they'll say the two are completely unconnected, and that this is a deep focus earthquake as a result of the subduction of the oceanic slab like discussed, and this is a shallow earthquake due to the faulting, the normal faulting of the Granada Basin, and that is true, but they are connected together. Here's another example of how they're connected together. We had 2 big earthquakes strike in this area, which is right now experiencing the earthquake swarming in 1955 and 1966. So we had a magnitude 5.1 strike Armia right here, 1955, and a year later, a magnitude 5 struck just, I don't know, kilometer to the northwest there. So looks like 3 kilometers to the northwest there. So all in the Granada Basin. So of course, if you're going to have a big earthquake that's deep and those waves are coming up, you're loading all these faults in the Granada Basin. And so it's really no surprise to me that then a year after, or it could be less than a year, but basically a year after that super deep, super high magnitude 7.8, you had these 2 earthquakes pop off. And these are the biggest earthquakes for this area going back, as far as I could find with all the records and everything, going back to the 1884 Andalusia earthquake, which really shows us the power and potential of these earthquakes. You had other earthquakes too. You had a big earthquake in 1431, okay? That's on record. The intensity for that was 8 to 9. So a 9 is, it's like, well, it's not extreme shaking. That would be a 10. It's like violent. I think 9 is violent shaking. And you also had an earthquake in the off to the other basin here, to the east in 1531. So there is a history of big earthquakes striking greater than magnitude 6, but they're fairly spread out. I will say that. But we see that right now we're experiencing the biggest earthquake swarm that this basin has had in decades, okay? Because you had the 2020 through 2021 Santa Fe seismic sequence. That's the one I discussed where the maximum magnitude was 4.5. That was, you know, a few years ago. But you also had seismic sequences in 1988, the Agron swarm at magnitude 4.0 peak. So not that big, right? But it was a swarm, multiple events, right? 300 plus events for all of these I'm about to list off. Going a little bit further back, 1985, the Loja swarm, the peak magnitude for that was a 3.9, again, also 300 plus events. And then in 1979, you had the Fuente Vaqueros seismic series. And so I don't know what the peak magnitude for that was, but it wasn't listed and wasn't that notable as a result. But there were a bunch of events for that. So these sort of swarms have occurred, but the 2020 to 2021 swarm caught a lot of people's attention because it was strong with these 6 magnitude 4.0 plus events and the magnitude 4.5 at the greatest. Well, this has been stronger than that already. Maybe not as many events yet, but according to the IGN, 2 magnitude 4.8s. The USGS has it as a 5.2 and a 4.9. However you cut it, it's at least a cumulative magnitude of 5, which puts it right up there near the top in terms of significance. Now, to go back really quick to draw another connection for you, which is interesting, okay? Again, 1954, here we see our magnitude 5s, the day, the year, and 2 years after, okay? 1954. Well, we had, in 1956, the Amorgos earthquake here, which ruptured in between Santorini and Amorgos in the Aegean Sea, magnitude 7.7, and this generated the strongest tsunami for the Aegean Sea, I think actually for the entire Mediterranean in 200 plus years. So this was a massive event that killed a lot of people, and this was back in 1956. So that was a pretty big deal. Now, why am I mentioning that? Well, that's only 2 years after 1954. And, we're discussing, if I zoom out here, we're discussing this being the biggest event to occur in the entire 20th century, with the biggest tsunami in at least 200 years. The 7.8 down there is also an extremely huge event. So they're closely linked together in time, 2 years apart, all right? Well, what's been happening right now? We're having this earthquake swarm Granada in 2026, okay? Let's check out what happened in Santorini last year, because there was a massive earthquake swarm that struck Santorini January and February of 2025, consisting of 15,000, 20,000 plus events, multiple magnitude 5s, like a ton of magnitude 5s, right in that same location. That's right in the area of that magnitude 7.7, which ruptured that tectonic regime. Now, the reason for the Santorini swarm, again, January, February 2025, was there was a magmatic dike intrusion. But we're seeing parallels across time. 1954 to 1956, you had 2 huge earthquakes, magnitude 7.7 and 7.8 strike, the Aegean and the Strait of Gibraltar, which are key tectonic settings for Europe and Africa. And then in 2025 and 2026, we're getting these earthquake swarms to strike the same locations, which is very interesting. So there's these parallels across time. Now, I mentioned how the last megaquake to occur before the one in Kamchatka was the 12th of August right there, kind of pointing and hinting at that date being important. Well, the next megaquake we had was July 29th. That was Kamchatka. Also, the megaquake before this, August 12th, South Sandwich Islands, also July 29th. So these days are important. August 12th is the total solar eclipse that we just had. And on July 29th of this year, guess what happened? Well, let's look. Because we had a Jupiter cazimi that occurred exactly on July 29th. And this was important for quite a few reasons. We zoom back. Here we see Jupiter, the Sun, the Earth, okay? We go back here to the 29th of July. We see that Jupiter's in the constellation of Cancer. And we also notice that this is a full moon. So you have Jupiter, Sun, Earth, Moon alignment, all occurring on the 29th. Now, Jupiter cazimi basically represents a reset for Jupiterian archetypal principles, and Jupiter in general represents making things bigger and inflating them and stronger. And where did this occur? This occurred in Cancer, and that is cardinal water. and it occurred with the full moon, which is a very notable alignment. Well, the moon is the ruler of Cancer, and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So it's this synchronicity and this synergy that exists there. And after this cazimi, on the 29th of July, we started to see the earthquake activity become synchronized with the lunar rhythm. The big high magnitude earthquake activity started to get synchronized with the lunar rhythm, which is interesting because this was the day that we had the magnitude 7.1 strike southern Japan. You may recall that. That knocked bridges down, and that was very destructive. 7.1 according to the Japanese, 6.8 according to USGS. Then the 7.4 that struck Colombia was 2 days before the new moon, well within that new moon period. The 7.7 which struck Indonesia was 2 days after that new moon total solar eclipse, well within that period. So we've seen this synchronization now with the lunar rhythm, and that occurred exactly when you had this full moon cazimi with Jupiter in Cancer, which is basically telling you that there's going to be a reset of this lunar principle, and it's going to be more powerful and more in charge. Okay, we've also just added a little bit more evidence to that. The past 5 eruptions at Kilauea, Hawaii, one of the world's largest hotspots, have been perfectly synchronized with the lunar rhythm. New moons, full moons every 14 days, boom, boom, boom. 3 of those happened on the day of exact. One of them was 1 day off, and one of them was 2 days off. So all of them well within the time window. Now, if we go forward, just remember that position of Jupiter, okay? Remember that position. If we go forward to the next total solar eclipse, which is going to be the longest of the 21st century, look at where the sun's position is. There it is. It's right there, same location in Cancer. So there's our new moon. We see the new moon right there, right? New moon, that's the total solar eclipse, the longest of the 21st century. And we can actually even zoom in here a little bit. And as I move this, it's going to be kind of difficult, but you'll see right there, see how it's slicing across? Yeah. So that right there is showing us that this Jupiter cazimi that we just went through on the 29th of July is connected in to this eclipse on the 2nd of August next year. And while July 29th is also the megaquake for Kamchatka and also the megaquake for Alaska. So it's really quite remarkable. These connections, they're very obvious. You don't have to really think too much to grasp the significance to them. It's not like we're doing crazy calculations of 777 days after George Bush said this and this happened, you know, those crazy things. It's not that complicated. It's really pretty self-evident, which I find really, really interesting. So it's closing out this this browser here. So we can look at the tensor plot for this, and we see 2 different solutions. This is for the 4.8, the first one, or as USGS has it, the 5.2 that struck on the 14th. And we're just confirming effectively the seismic characteristics. We see 2 different fault solutions. You have plane A, plane B, and we see that the rake here, which tells you whether it's a reverse, an extensional, or a strike slip, this is negative 71 or it's negative 117. So both of them have a little bit of oblique movement, but in general, because it's negative and both of them fairly close to negative 90, we're looking at an extensional earthquake with just a little bit of side-to-side motion. So it's like mostly just it going down and a little bit side to side. Those can be very destructive. So that's what our moment tensor plot is showing us. And here we see some of the faults that run through this area. And in fact, this is a good research paper to read. I'll link the research papers I read in the video description. But there's a whole bunch of faults running through the Granada Basin, as you can tell. And as a result of that, there's just a high potential for high magnitude earthquakes. Here we see the main fault of Granada Basin, and we see the maximum magnitude that they calculated for them. So we see 6.7, 6.4, 6.6, 6.3, 6.9. You know, there's different calculations, but all of them basically are in that magnitude 6+ range, as you'll notice, right? So these can all host big earthquakes. We see the length of these faults. The north of Sierra Tejeda fault there, 23 kilometers long. The Granada fault, 17 kilometers long. The Padul fault, 15.2. This is for the Granada Basin. They also examined faults that were within the other basin to the side. That's the Gadi Baza Basin. And we see that it also has the potential to have these big earthquakes. 6.7, you know, just look at the numbers, right? That one's even 7.0. The fault lengths here, 23 kilometers, 22, 37, right? So there is a potential for sure for there to be big earthquakes. I mean, the Baza fault right here is potentially responsible for that September 30th, 1531 earthquake that struck with a microseismic magnitude of 6.0. The intensity was 8 to 9. So going from very strong, I think maybe actually severe to violent. So very, very powerful earthquake. And just in general, like all these faults, they can do it. They can go nuts at any moment. And they have many times before, and they will again at some point. So we're right now effectively seeing that, which is important to note. Now I just want to make sure. Yeah, so let's look now at our USGS historic map, because I kind of want to put these earthquakes in 2011 into context. So USGS has them also at higher values than the IGN does. We see that, well, that's 1984. But here we see 2021, that is the August 12th earthquake. USGS has it as a 4.6, and the IGN has it at a 4.5. So you can see that this is a notable swarm. You do get some magnitude 5s up here. This is 1951. This is 1951 as well. Both of them occurring within 2 months of each other. So another example of how earthquakes can be connected together in time. That's occurring there along the rim of the Granada Basin like this. So you have a lot of faults actually clustered around the rim of the basin. So that makes sense that we're seeing that, though that's back in 1951. And if we go over here, we'll see why I'm so concerned about this. We have our VS30 map for Granada. And here is the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And what is VS30? It's the average shear wave velocity over the top 30 meters of the subsurface. This is what I have quite a bit of experience in because I've done a bunch of these surveys. I also did it in a basin, which is Napa Valley. Napa Valley, especially the town of Napa itself, is in a volcanic basin. And so I know what sort of measurements you get for basins. And also the magnitude 6 was struck there in 2014 was super, super destructive. A lot of houses, buildings shaken off their foundations, you know, walls and buildings coming down in some areas downtown, etc., because the shaking was very, very strong. Magnitude 6, there was this resonance amplification that occurred. So we see the shear wave velocity is higher for the mountains. That makes sense. But look here where you have Granada. Values are pretty low. Now, what is the shear wave? The shear wave velocity, you have 3 types of waves. You have compressional waves, P waves. So you get this compressional aspect, they're the fastest. That's the initial jolt you may feel. Unless it's a low magnitude earthquake, in which case it's you'll just only feel the surface waves. After the P waves, you get shear waves. And then after the shear waves, you get surface waves. Well, you're going to get a sense of the seismic risk for a location based off of the VS30 profile. So the average shear wave velocity for the top 30 meters, or VS100 would be for the top 100 feet. That's what they use in the United States. Same thing. If your values are in this range right here, right? Like if you're up at 400, you're actually doing pretty good. Like people on the east side of the Napa Valley, where there's a lot of vineyards and more, their shear wave values are like 400, 500, 600, 600 even a little higher up along the sides of the valley. Well, they just felt a jolt from that magnitude 6. It didn't really affect them that much. They were also a little further away from the epicenter, but maybe some things got knocked down, but it wasn't a big deal. People within the right next to the Napa River, especially on the west side, their VS30 values are like 300, 200, somewhere in that range. And there was a ton of shaking. So we see that right here. I mean, look at this whole area there. You have values that are in this 300 to 400 range, which isn't that great. And then you even have values here, which are going into the 200 range. So that's the thing. You don't need a big earthquake to really cause quite a bit of destruction. And 1884 is a great example of that, because there were places that just completely got destroyed, decimated. We're talking 80, 90% of buildings just flattened. And I mean, there was 839 people dead from the Ana Lucia earthquake, 1,500 injuries that were reported, 4,400 buildings that were destroyed, and 13,000 plus buildings that were damaged. So that's certainly possible to happen again. We hope that's not the case, but again, it's certainly possible. So let's check out some of this damage. I've pulled up some reposts that I've done on X to show you this. And so we see some cracks in these buildings here. You know, it may just be a little bit more superficial, but certainly not all of them are. I mean, this is looking pretty serious. So there's already been damage, but imagine now magnitude 6 strikes. Like, that would be definitely what just helps these buildings come down. If it was to happen in the next week, 2 weeks, even months, it's going to take some time to repair all this damage and more. So that's some photos right there. Here we can see a video of the shaking. So, you know, I'm more in line with the USGS value of 5.2. Now, this is what happened today, but this is quite a bit of shaking for this earthquake here, which I think the IGN has this one at a 4.0. Because the first earthquake was at like 8 a.m. Universal, and then it was 9:37, and then it was, look at this. That's not a magnitude 4, man. That's not a magnitude 4. USGS has that as a 4.7. That makes a lot more sense for what we're seeing here. Just based off of my expertise, that's what I would say. So I think there's something a little off with those values for that the official agency out of Spain is reporting. Maybe they don't want to freak people out. Like, I don't know, but that's certainly, that happens. People play into that. Same thing with like Campi Flegrei in Naples, Pasquale, right? Like the volcanoes doing something crazy and they're trying to get people, oh, don't worry, everything's fine. It's like, I'm not so sure about that. So yeah, another clear example of how long the shaking was here, right? That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 15 seconds of shaking. That's not a magnitude 4. Again, the time there, this would be for that. So I don't know what the deal is. That's not a magnitude 4 though. Magnitude 4 is like a jolt, like 2 seconds. Maybe a little bit longer than that. Again, we do have these lower shear wave velocity values, so there's going to be a bit of seismic resonance amplification. But I'm more in line with the USGS values of 4.7. Here we see another one here from the area. And there's the earthquake. This one must have been a little further afield, a bit more of just a jolt there. These are all the earthquakes that have occurred today. And people are still basically running out, and a new earthquake strikes, magnitude 3.8, they feel it. There's been, you know, lots of magnitude 3s that have occurred. So this is already a pretty serious situation, as you can tell. This is already a pretty serious situation. Doesn't matter what numbers you use or how you slice it. But if you look at everything, I personally think something big is coming. I think the probability lies more in that direction rather than the other direction, because of the connections to the other megaquakes and the eclipses and the planetary alignments. This is so synchronistic, right? I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm not Nostradamus, but you know, there are signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. That is absolutely true. You know, the Bible got some things right for sure. And we are seeing that. Like, we have the technology and the ability and the history and the education, the learning to like look at these and interpret them to a reasonable degree. Now, it's also worth pointing out the antipode for Spain. So here, that's the opposite side of the globe. Here we see Spain. I typed in Granada, and we see it goes right down to New Zealand. And that's interesting, that the antipode is New Zealand exactly. Like, of all the places, right, in the Pacific, it just happens to squarely land right on New Zealand. If you were to go further up in the Iberian Peninsula, it's going to go a little further down into New Zealand to the south because of how that works. So we do have this connection across time with antipodal earthquakes between the Iberian Peninsula and New Zealand in the 1700s specifically, with some big earthquakes. We've had some elevated earthquake activity around New Zealand over the past month or so. So we could be connected into that. But I'm not thinking too much about that. If we do get a big earthquake for New Zealand, let's say magnitude 6+, then we should look here closely, and vice versa. If we do get a big earthquake to hit Spain, then we should be looking at New Zealand. But as of right now, it's just worth pointing out, but really going beyond that, it's a little too much for me, I would say. So something seems to be happening. I don't know what the deal is precisely, but this eclipse appears to be very important. The last eclipse appeared to be important. It's just kind of bizarre how we have these 3 eclipses crossing over Spain in the span of 18 months. So, I mean, it's just like the chances of that, I just don't know what the chances of that are. I don't think it's high. It's very, very low. Here we see these 3 eclipse paths, right? So there's August 12th, 2026. Here's the total solar eclipse, the longest 21st century, right there, 2nd of August. Here's the annular eclipse path for the 26th of January. It's just, what are the chances of this? It's crazy. And they all converge over Spain. So lots of stuff happening there. Here we have the document that's been put out by IGN about this earthquake swarm. So this is useful to look at, and we're going to get 1 billion pop-ups from Adobe, which is, look at this, there's awful. So I'll turn myself off for this, but let's just give this a read really quick. I translated this from Spanish to English. So they've been recording a series of shallow earthquakes in the vicinity of the towns of Alhenadin, Gohar, La Zubia, about 2 to 12 kilometers south of the city of Granada. The largest earthquakes have been 2 events, magnitude 4.8, and there have been others, both of them very shallow and widely felt. Most of the earthquakes have been less than magnitude 2, all at shallow depths less than 10 kilometers. 9 are greater than or equal to magnitude 3, and 45 have been felt by the population. 432 events overall since they published this. And the largest aftershocks, they're calling them aftershocks, and it's possibly the case. It's certainly possible. Largest aftershocks recorded so far are magnitude 3.9, 4.2, and 4. And that was today after the 4.8. Again, USGS has that one as a 4.9. So there are some differences. Here we see their table of the biggest earthquakes to strike. And if you add these all together, the cumulative magnitude is about magnitude 5. That's what the cumulative magnitude is, about 5. Go down, here we see the moment tensor plots. We see the swarm with the map, okay? And basically, you notice how all these look very similar. They all have the white center. These are all extensional earthquakes. Some slight differences in the slip between them, like the oblique slip, but they're all extensional earthquakes. Now, the epicenter locations that IGN has is different than the USGS. They have them in like a perfect line right there. So maybe this is highlighting a new fault zone. What you do notice is that you have these faults that are going from the northwest to the southeast, like this. So they're all like this. They're parallel to each other. What we observed in 2020 and 2021 with the Santa Fe seismic sequence is that earthquake activity leapt from one fault to another throughout that sequence, which is pretty interesting, pretty cool. So there can be this progression of energy through the fault systems. So this could be maybe some previously unidentified fault that exists, because if you don't have an earthquake to highlight the fault, then you really don't know where it is or that it exists unless you have a surface rupture or something like that. And you need a lot of low magnitude earthquakes to really finally resolve different fault planes at depth. So something is definitely happening here, as we can tell. Widely felt by the population, 15,000 questionnaires have been received through its website and mobile app, and the damage is still being reviewed by the staff of the seismic network, so intensity will be updated as more information is gathered. Non-structural damage has been reported from the magnitude 4.8 earthquakes on the 14th to 18th, with objects falling several buildings within the epicentral zone. We saw cracks to buildings and more, so I think they're a little behind on this, but that's fine. And yeah, basically they just go on to talk about some of the historic earthquakes. So highest seismic activity and hazard of the entire Iberian Peninsula. We can actually look at that as well right here. Here we have a graphic put out by the IGN, and we see that Granada has the highest seismic risk for the location, for the entire Iberian Peninsula. Also Murcia here as well because of historic activity, a little bit up here in the Pyrenees, but in general, Granada is the site of highest seismic risk for Spain, and we are now seeing that earthquake swarm strike. So again, it's all connected. The deep focus quakes and the subduction of the Atlantic underneath the Strait of Gibraltar, coinciding with the gravity anomaly, coinciding with the Granada Basin, right? It's all right there. It is all right there. So several historic destructive earthquakes have occurred: 1884, 1431, and they list off some other ones, some other seismic sequences that reach certain intensities of 7 and 8, which would be 1806, 1807, 1911, and 1918, and earthquakes of magnitude 5. The 1955 Armia and 1956 Perchil earthquakes. Now, those aren't in the USGS catalog, so which is why you have to do the research, because if you just type and choose the box for Iberian Peninsula historic earthquakes and you set the magnitudes and everything, these don't show up. So you wouldn't know that they happened after that magnitude 7.8 deep focus. And so you wouldn't maybe build the connection between the deep subduction setting underneath the Iberian Peninsula and the Granada Basin with that gravity anomaly, right? You need these little links to really clearly see it. They're not in the USGS record. But here we see, the IGN clearly identifying those two earthquakes, which are the most significant instrumental events in the Granada Basin. So what does that mean? Instrumental events. They were picked up by seismographs. That 5.2, according to USGS, 4.8 for IGN, stands in that record now, especially if you use that USGS value. And recently, the series recorded between December 2020 and August 2021 stands out. 3,000 shallow earthquakes, 6 of them magnitudes 4.0 to 4.5. Largest being that 4.5 on August 12th. We discussed that already. But here we see the map for this. And so we see they show the 1954 earthquake there. And then we have 1955 right here. And there's 1956. And we also had this magnitude 6.3, also deep focus in 2010, showing that that wasn't a one-off. Like these sort of deep earthquakes occur regularly, and they're big. They're big earthquakes. We see just how much swarming there is, and we see the different faults through part of the Granada Basin. This is one of the bigger faults for the Granada Basin right here. But there's also a lot clustered up here. And underneath the entire basin, by the way, there is this basal detachment. So up here, you get these faults going down, okay? And they're pretty steep. Then they reach this more horizontal detachment, about 10 to 12 kilometers down up here, and that actually deepens to 20 to 25 kilometers to the southwest. So there's larger structures at play too. The crust here is about 35 to 38 kilometers in thickness. And then you're starting to transition into the mantle. So you're talking more like asthenosphere and then mantle as you go further down. So They've employed some portable seismographs to really help resolve what's happening with this swarm. And I do want to point out that, this swarm that occurred in 2020 to 2021, it lasted almost an entire year. So we could be at the beginning of this. This swarm has already been more powerful, more destructive. It's only been 4 days, starting on the 14th of August. Only been 4 days. So it's possible that this swarm continues all the way till that total solar eclipse on August 2nd of 2027. These swarms last a long time. And again, for this one here, the strongest event was in August. So 8 months after, then you had the strongest event. This doesn't mean that we're ready through the thick of it. Just look at the last seismic sequence, which is weaker than this one. Its strongest event was 8 to 9 months later, occurring the same day as that 8.1 megaquake that struck the South Sandwich Islands on the 12th of August, which then we didn't have a megaquake for 4 years afterwards. Just the synchronicities, they're just so crazy. It took me a while to research this video, which is why I'm doing the live stream a little later than I would have liked to do in the day. But I had to really dig into it and elucidate all this information for you guys. So it's really quite remarkable, if you ask me. And there's something to this. There's certainly something to this, and we will get to the bottom of it. That's just simply what we're going to do. We're going to figure out what is happening, and hopefully everything is okay. But if I was living in this area, I would certainly take precautions. I would definitely take precautions. So with that, let's see what's happened with our super thanks. What is your opinion on earthquake lights, flashes phenomenon? Yeah, this is an electrical plasma discharge that's coming up. We've talked about that a lot. It's not necessarily an opinion that I can have. We just simply observe that there's these huge electric discharges that occur during powerful earthquakes, especially if they're land-based. And it doesn't even have to be powerful earthquakes. We saw earthquake lights with a magnitude 5 that struck China just like a month ago. Like, that was caught on video. I reposted that on my X account. So even a magnitude 5 is able to produce earthquake lights, but they usually have to be shallow and crustal, like not ocean crust, under the ocean, because the seawater will absorb all that energy. It's highly conductive. But if it's just the atmosphere, which is not that conductive, it'll just beam it right up to the ionosphere, and we see these earthquake lights and flashes. So if these people here start to notice weird things like that, then that's a sign that something's coming, because it can happen before the earthquake. And there's pre-earthquake signals. And ideally, we'd have a Schumann resonance station right in this area to start picking up abnormalities. And there may be, but not one that I know of. So thank you, Witch Within, for the super thanks. And question from Grush Lang. On timing and periodicity of quakes and solar eclipses, vast geological timescales, I don't get the connection. Resonance of quake waves through the Earth, chaotic but predictable. Keep it up. Not really sure what your question is. I think in general, I'm not decided on the connection between eclipses and earthquakes, because we've seen many eclipses where nothing crazy happens. I think it really depends on the geologic setting. I think it depends on the length of the eclipse, the other planetary geometry that's active, for example, and some of these factors, basically. So with this upcoming eclipse being the longest and perfectly slicing through all the plate boundaries of the Atlantic, Africa, Europe, Middle East, Indian Ocean, if there ever was going to be an eclipse that would perhaps trigger earthquake activity, it would be this one, all right? Whereas if you get some eclipse that's like, I don't know, arcing through here and that's it, well, of course there's geology everywhere, but probably nothing crazy. But this one so perfectly matches with all the plate boundaries and more. And we're already seeing now this earthquake swarm that's notable pop off there the same day as the eclipse 1 year before, August 2nd of this year, 2026. We saw the magnitude 5.5 that struck Egypt just slightly off of this eclipse path. So the total eclipse path. So, it's interesting. So I don't think we can, and we saw the seismic burst on both sides of this eclipse. So again, the jury's out. For me, I don't think I can just definitively say no. I also can't definitively say yes. I'm looking at this eclipse and these 3 eclipses crossing Spain very closely, because this may be a good case study to show either way. Like, if we don't get anything from this, this is the one that would show us something. So if we don't get something from this, I'm definitely leaning more towards no. But right now we're seeing evidence that yes, there can be a connection with eclipses and activity, but maybe not in a way that we expect. So yeah, thank you for your super thanks. And my favorite earthquake, I don't really know how to answer that question. I mean, I've lived through a few earthquakes, and so maybe those are just the magnitude 5s that I felt that were just like a quick jolt and a shake. I mean, I don't really want to have a favorite for something that's like killed 10,000 people, right? So, yeah, I mean, maybe the 5.6 which struck Ukiah Willett, just because I grew up in that area in the summers and holidays and stuff, and then also it's just a very interesting historic earthquake occurring again 24th of June 2026. So you know, it's kind of a weird question, but thank you for the super thanks, appreciate it. And thank you for modding Dan. He's here all the time now on our live streams. So thank you so much, Dan, for moderating. And make sure to smash that like button, everybody. Okay, so let's wrap up. Thank you all so much for watching, everybody. I have been your host, Stefan Burns, geologist, geophysicist, space weather guy. Please smash that thumbs up button to help the channel grow. Subscribe to stay up to date on everything that's happening with the Earth energetically, earthquakes, volcanoes, severe weather, geomagnetic storms. We also cover what's happening in our space environments, all connected. So solar activity, space weather, planetary alignments, and resonances, interstellar, cosmic forces, consciousness, and more. I bring that all together, present videos almost daily. Hope to see you around. Prayers for everyone right now in Spain. We hope that this earthquake swarm is all she wrote. It's very possible, though, that this continues on for more weeks and even months. And it's also very possible that we get stronger earthquakes from this magnitude 5.5, magnitude 6. The upper magnitude that we estimate for these faults in the Granada Basin, in the shallow basin, like the top 10 kilometers, would be up to magnitude 7. If it's going to be a big earthquake in the subducting slab, that can go well beyond magnitude 6. It can, you know, the biggest that we saw in 1954 is 7.8. But that's 600 kilometers down, deep focus, totally different mechanisms. And while people on the surface would feel that over a huge area, it's not going to be destructive like a magnitude 6.5 would be 5 kilometers down. So we're watching this very closely. I'll be back with more information. I'll definitely be also posting updates on this on my X account at Stefan Burns Geo. So if you really want to stay up to date as it's happening, that's the place to go. But I promise I release update videos here when it is necessary. When there's big stuff to report, I'm on it. So I'm your guy. Prayers for everyone in Spain. Thank you all so much and have a great day.